and we care for each other. We do whatever it takes. But our world is on fire, and our future is at stake. We don't have time to wait, but no country, business, or individual can fix this on their own. Together, we can set things straight. Let's act. Through the power of many, we can make change happen. Let's encourage sustainable solutions. Let's suggest new ways of doing things and demand bad practices to stop. We all unite behind the one thing that matters, to save our world. Will you join us?
We are in a climate emergency, and we are very far from where we need to be.
Welcome to the second Exponential Climate Action Summit.
This decade is crucial for the future of us all.
The outcomes for humanity could actually spell disaster.
There are no jobs on a dead planet.
And that's why waiting is not an option.
We're not recovering in a green way as we had hoped last Earth Day.
Poor communities are the one really facing the biggest burden of climate effects.
World Bank estimates that every year we need $4 trillion of capital in emerging and developing economies to pay for the mitigation and adaptation needs.
Personally, I don't believe the fossil fuel industry should continue to be allowed to operate the way it's been operating for the last several decades.
The vast majority of green products on the market today create new profits for investment firms that do absolutely nothing to fight climate change.
We have to transform the 55% greenhouse gas reduction target that we now have at the European level. The declaration that we're getting from other countries, including Biden today, to halve their emissions into actions.
So we need strong climate action from business. We need strong climate action from finance. I will encourage every company, every financial institution to join the race to zero immediately.
Investing in a low-carbon, a resilient economy is actually an enormous opportunity right now.
The winners will be the ones creating positive impact.
And what we do at Prime is we offer investment options in solar energy projects in emerging markets.
So FinTech is helping resolve access issues for the financial excluded while addressing climate change issues at the same time.
The key here is to put at least the same amount of determination behind actions to achieving this target as we do for major financial or business targets that the companies typically steered on.
So we don't have time, but we do have solutions.
When you scale this solution, in fact, we will save money. We will increase our productivity.
It's a $100 trillion plus economy, the greatest opportunities ever.
That is how we change things together. Your opinions will also be a rating on our platform, where those business and organizations that are doing good climate action will get a better climate score compared to the ones not doing enough. This is going to change how corporations compete.
This top line is 200 to 300 green growth companies that are delivering much better results while taking down our footprints.
Young people have demonstrated that campaigns on the ground can actively shape where the money goes.
We want to be the one, the provider, that shows to the company, its employees, that you can make a change with your savings.
We now got 87 asset managers with $37 trillion of assets. That's more than a third of global assets committed to net zero by 2050, and 43 banks with $29 trillion.
The drive to net zero is the growth story of the 21st century.
And the time to act is now.
And about 73% globally of all used clothing is being incinerated or landfilled today.
Our food systems are failing massively, both people and planet.
In 40, 50 years, the glass age will sort of be over because we don't have any sand left to produce glass.
So ultimately, over 90% of all that hard-won stuff we use slips through our fingers and
A warm welcome to the fourth of 5 days of broadcast here at Stockholm +50 Climate Hub, hosted by We Don't Have Time in partnership with the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, Ericsson, and Space Arena, where we are right now here at this fantastic place. My name is Catarina Rolfsdotter-Jansson, and I will be your host, together with my colleagues Nick Nuttall and Shweta Chakraborty from our US office. Today, we'll bring you insights from some of the frontrunners in the transport sector. We will take a closer look at the growing field of climate innovation and also at how technology can be used to democratize climate knowledge and thereby accelerating climate action. But facts alone won't do the trick. Storytelling will also play a major role in today's broadcast. And we'll start by highlighting how Sweden's biggest government-funded innovation program, Viable Cities, is using storytelling to speed up the transition of 23 Swedish cities with an entirely new method. This new groundbreaking approach has already received international attention from the BBC, Bloomberg Businessweek, and even the British Parliament, which actually organized an inquiry a month ago here to hear more about and also to see how this could inspire the way they approach the climate transition in cities. But today is the first time that the method will be presented in its entity. This is in fact the global premiere here at Stockholm +50. And we're going to hear from the researcher behind this method, Mr. Per Grankvist. It's my pleasure to introduce him. Please give him a warm hand. Wonderful to have you here, Per.
Thank you so much. Nice
you
to
have
meet
the floor.
Thank you. Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, well, that is how most stories tend to start. And when you hear people say those words, you're immediately transported back to your childhood, and you envision there to be dragons and princesses and friends and foes. There will be obstacles and this constant flow and sort of creating of tension and releasing of tension. That's how stories start. And story has the potential to save the world, of course. Once, if you know your storytelling, they can transport you to another mental being, another mental state. Let's, for example, take what is supposed to be the shortest novel that was existed, written by Ernest Hemingway. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. When we use storytelling in the right way, we could place people somewhere else, and that's what we're trying to use as a method and what we've been working on for the past few years. And the thing is, if you look at the future and what's happening, we can say something about how storytelling can be told. Behind me, you see all these pictures of what happened 50 years ago here in Stockholm when we had the last sort of big environmental conference. The vision of the future in 1972 was the nya stenstaden, the new stone city on the Järvafältet Park, just north of Stockholm. And here we can see all the things they've envisioned in the future. We can see all the little buildings and they go close together, the various shapes and forms and parks. We can see from above, there seem to be 2 squares and some kind of public space, and then a public hall in the middle, and wide streets, naturally. But what we also can see, you can see what they envisioned of the future. Already in 1972, you can see that they were actually highlighting buses, because buses were the future and they were supposed to be electric. We can also see the buses here, and some parts of the future that today might seem strange or not, but there's elements of it that will be there and that will be there forever, such as white men sit underneath trees. That seems to be a thing. Compare that to how Stockholm is envisioning the future today. We can then see that things are in color, but on a basic level, they are very much also the same today. We can see the sort of flyover, we can see the blocks of houses and how they are sort of envisioned close to green spaces. We can see over here sort of back then, we had a bus system with electric. Now we want to envision electric boats, and a part of that city, this is Norra Djurgårdsstaden, will be created actually as an artificial island. And again, which seems to be a constant whenever we envision the future, there is again white people underneath trees doing stuff. Look at how we envision the future for the past 100 years, from the 1930s to today. And this is not an actual timeline. Now you sort of mixed it up a bit just to give you a flavor. In the 1920s, we can see they were not flying cars by then, but they were flying trains, actually. And down there, we can see from the 1950s, then we have the hoovering cars. We can also see that we have cars that appear a bit like moving living rooms. And then there's lots of things that are the same. We still have these monoliths of houses and green spaces around them that we're supposed to be living in or working in and then transporting in between now and then. And still we have funny things about sort of what we will dress like in the future, even now and then. So comparing all this, there's of course, obviously the thing you're now looking for, which is the constant in all future development and all the visions of the future, white people underneath trees. The thing is, 50 years later, one can of course ask, why aren't we already living in the cities that we envisioned 50 years ago? What is happening? Why does it take so long time? It seems like the vision of the future city is like a friend who's bad at keeping time. I will be there in 1 minute. 1 minute, I'll be there in 1 minute, and then never arrives. So what is the problem here? And also a question that comes to mind is, of course, when will we be having these fancy clothes? I basically look like I'm sort of 50 years old, 50 years ago already. Maybe another thing that is interesting, that already 50 years ago, we already knew that our way of life were causing global warming. That was a known method. And still, we haven't changed our way of life. We can see here from the images from 50 years ago, there were even cars parked outside the parliament. That's the Green Park today. But still, why isn't it changing? We've been pushing facts for 50 years. We've been pushing scientific solutions for 50 years. We've been talking about how important it is and lay it out for the people in order to make them to change. So how's that going for you? It isn't working. And the problem is that maybe it could be the way we tell stories about the future. Because whenever we tell stories about the future, they seem sort of to be boring. You don't like them because I say that you're going to be climate neutral, and climate neutrality does seem a bit like, okay, I'm going to take your hamburger away, I'm going to take your car away, and you can never go to Spain again. And that seems boring. We don't want that because we are basically kids, all of us. We want fun stuff. And another factor, perhaps, is that a lot of people who talk about the climate neutral future, they are nerds. We don't like nerds. They say, you have to do this. And then they get this cartoonish voice. You have to change now, otherwise the planet will burn up. Well, I don't want to. So if we consider what we've been doing for the past 50 years, maybe it's time to consider the fact that truth is the facts are overrated when it's getting people to change behavior. What we can learn from Donald Trump was the fact that he on the campaign trail often said, I feel this to be true. And he was heard by people who also felt that to be true and thus elected him to become the president. So when we talk about the future, maybe it's time to try something else. Maybe it's time to try fiction, going from the very scientifically sort of language to a more fictional language. Halfway back to Stockholm 1972 is this movie. This is a 1997 movie called The Fifth Element. And what we see here behind me is the future of New York, how it was envisioned in 1997. And there's some things we cannot relate to, obviously. Why is she dressed like that? Why is she doing on the outside of skyscrapers? She seems incredibly far down. But some things we can relate to, like bad taxi drivers parking everywhere, you can yell at them. And also the comforting sign of McDonald's. Then we get a signal that in the future we will be able to indulge in hamburgers that will cause heart arrest. But still, that feels comforting. And maybe there's something to learn here as well. If you want to get people to understand something about the future, you have to involve emotions. And that's a thing we've learned, to believe. Here we go. I will get this back up in a second. Things are restarting behind me. We can go back. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll click from here and we just jump forward to where we were. This happens when it's live, no problem. The future is unexpected sometimes. To believe the future, we need to be emotionally engaged. And what a better example to use than this movie, Wall-E. It's arguably one of the best environmental movies ever, and it teaches a lot of lessons. But from a storytelling perspective, it's super important. For those of you who haven't understood the importance of this movie, it's about that little garbage compact robot called Wall-E, the yellow guy. He's left on Earth because Earth cannot be inhabited by humankind anymore, so they left and gone into spaceship somewhere else. He's left compacting garbage and piling them up. Humankind thus send a robot or a droid back to Earth to every now and then to see if it's inhabitable again. And that droid is called Eve. And they found each other and they form a friendship, perhaps even love. You don't need a row because there's no dialogue. There's actually no dialogue for 30 minutes. And still it works very well because the storytelling is excellent. So after a while, he shows her his most precious thing, which is a small plant that he keeps growing in a shoe. And when she gets there, she instantly locks to start sending the green signal back to the mothership. And he's frustrated and he's devastated. He doesn't know why she's sort of not talking to him again. So trying not to revive his relationship, he tries to take her around to all the places where they found, where they kindled the relationship, such as the garbage patch to watch the sunset. And seconds after this, you will see that he's trying to hold his hand with her, and that is where I start crying every time. And the thing is about this is that all this is, of course, fiction. There's nothing based on science. It does not matter, because I can feel it to be emotionally true. So I buy the whole package about the future. And this is something we can start to relate to. In order to talk about future, it needs to be emotionally true. And if we can do that, and that's what we start to do within the Viable Cities program, we start to think about what we can use storytelling in order to make sort of policies, officials, and city officials, policymakers, what we can make them brave again. If they can feel that the future isn't sort of a problem, if they feel that the future isn't boring, or that they will be the people who will take people's hamburgers and trips to Spain away. What if we can do that? So that's where we start to set out, by merging sort of age to millennia-old knowledge of how you tell stories with important science on human behaviors and on sustainable behaviors and lifestyles and so on. That's where we started. And so what we come to develop for the past sort of 3 years is this method, this sort of concept of a transformative practice that is emotionally true, locally relevant, and scientifically correct. Because it has to be scientifically correct, of course, but to tell stories, that's not where we lay our focus. So it's much more about talking about going from to speaking about all those numbers that we talk about all the time. 1.5 degrees, 350 ppm, 10 tons, going to be 1 ton. No one can really relate to that. When you talk about climate neutrality, it's that boring. No one will ever understand you. But rather going from sort of that to the numbers, to talking about the narrative, going from that sort of these sketches we've seen from the future, where it's sort of all made up and virtual in some sense, into something that feels much more closer to our heart. And that's what we're trying to do. And this method comes in sort of 5 stages, the way we work. The first stage is to have cities pick a story team that we sort of designed. And they can pick on the main problems, the main objectives they have. It's about transportation, it could be about sustainable consumption, it could be about food. That's mainly the 3 big issues people will talk about. And we create a story team that is based on how you tell a story. Then they make a story local. Then we talk about the central part is capturing a day of a hero in the city. Then we add science back again, making sure there's layers and stuff to it so that we can see the story and understand all the aspects that enables a sort of sustainable lifestyle. And then at the end, we gather people together and start thinking and talking about what's the quality of life to them. And thus they become a little bit more brave. Spoiler alert, all your favorite movies are the same. They're structured in the same way, and that's what will make you laugh and cry and feel emotionally engaged. No matter if it's The Lion King, if it's Star Wars, if it's The Matrix, they are basically done on the same sort of blueprint. It's been for thousands and thousands of years, but in the 1940s, an American guy started to pin that down, and it became what is now called a hero's journey. Essentially, here's every movie you've ever seen. We have a hero who has a call to action. Shouldn't he go somewhere? No, I don't want to go there. But there's someone, a guardian of some sort, said, you probably should go. And he sometimes then decides to go. He crosses that river from the ordinary world into the special world, from something that he knows to something that he doesn't know, and then enters a new phase. He then tries to find his way around to his goal. He meets friends and foes. It turns out he doesn't know who to trust and not. Things happen. There's some constant battles about a lot of things. And here we can have this sort of building up and release of tension that drives the storyboard inevitably forward. He then arrives at the dragon's den, and there's you have the big ordeal. And hopefully the guy or hero wins and then starts returning back. But the story isn't sort of ends there. An important part is coming back from that ordeal, with sort of reflecting on what you've done, reflecting on your past and experiences, and how you can be transformed. At one point, they crosses the river back into the ordinary world again, and then at the end of this, there's either a feast or a funeral. As I said, this is millennia old. Depending on if it's a comedy or tragedy, this is the same blueprint that's been done for ages. So that's what we use. That are sort of the themes we have are all based on this. Then we try to make the story local. And there's nothing more important in making story local than looking at the bright places and also looking at what people eat. Here are 3 pilots within in Umeå, in Göteborg, and in Malmö. In Umeå, we can see a guy eating what is typically Umeå, which is the rolled up pizza, rullpizza, which is crazy to everyone else unless you're born and raised in Umeå, where this makes perfect sense. It's a pizza, smaller than average, rolled up, and then have some stuff on it that could be in a kebab, but it's not a kebab, says the Umeå people. It is. And then they drink something that's very sweet, called a Trocadero, which is basically sort of Fanta, but even sweeter. And that's perfectly normal. So if you see that this can't be no elsewhere and then in Umeå, and of course it's a vegan thing, so we're in planetary boundaries. In Göteborg, when they have short of time and they want to have something to snack, they have the double half special is 2 hot dogs, sort of potato mash, there's other stuff that's not healthy for you, and then there's mayonnaise and there's ketchup and whatnot, and you drink that and you just chow down with a Coke and sort of when you're busy on time. So that's happening over here. And in Malmö, of course, we have the falafel, but more important for the food scene in Malmö is that you often like to eat outside, and then where shouldn't you be going if not the Ribban, the Risberg beach, and that's where people hang out and they have burgers and they have beer and whatnot. So this is how you explain that you have a good life in the future. Then we make a story of it, and we collect that stories and capturing that day. We do this to still photography. Video is way too much. It overloads you with sensations from the director. We want people to be engaged by their own feelings. Illustration is just sort of a lame vision of the future. That we can do. So it's always still photography. And then we try to get that together into the unexpected creative format of a PowerPoint. This is just because it's the most widely used and accessible format in the public sector, where we sort of talk about the events, what's happening to our hero doing life. Here he's going to fly away somewhere. And then we'll add layers. Here you can see all the different factors that actually contribute to him being able to do that, from ecosystem services to being choices by his employer and whatnot. And then we group those into modules. We can start talking about various aspects of that day. And eventually, we end up instead into talking to the policymakers on how do they feel about this? What the thing they do? Sort of how can they relate to it? It's a 2 to 3 hour workshop that is manipulative plan, but we get people to just reflect on it. And what they come away with is this. This is what they've seen on the day, and I should just get you through it very quickly. This is a day in the lifetime of Johan in Umeå, to get you to understand how we tell the story. We start off with Johan, who's obviously an ordinary guy. He needs to go to drop his kid off at school and then do some errands. So that's happening over here. And then he realized one of the errands should be to put some of the recycling back, and he does the recycling, and then on the way to the recycling station, he sort of loaded that bike far too much, so it's really heavy. And then comes the gust wind from nowhere, and there's plastic everywhere, and he curses heavily, and then gets his shit together somehow, and then start doing errands, leaving packages, whatnot. Eventually, on his way home, he had a flat tire. So he's then now late to go to the video meeting, and he comes home to his garden and to do a distance meeting, and the distance meeting seems to be cancelled, and that's never a bad idea. So he's revived again. He eventually gets it. He's going to travel to the mountains and to camping, so he leaves his home. Then via app, he finds another thing, another bike they can go, and he goes into city by the Umeå River, because people want to go the beautiful route, and that's what he's doing. He has plenty of time. He picks up the tent, because you rent stuff. You don't need to own stuff, so he does that, and then eventually makes his way to work and goes for the lunch with his colleague, and he eats the infamous rull pizza in Umeå. And we can see here they do that at the Renmarkstorget, so obviously it's very much Umeå thing. He gets back, manages to get cramp a few hours of work before he realizes that a friend calls, and he forgot about the after work. So they now need to rush and get to after work. You need to compensate for his bad behavior by buying a lot of beer, and things get quickly out of hand, as they do also in the future, especially when you do sort of the submarine. That's Jägermeister dropped into beer, can start you anywhere. Suddenly he realized he needs to be at the airport in 15 minutes, and the airport is super close to Umeå even today, but he needs to rush back to the city. He realizes he's way too drunk to take his bike, so he needs to take a car. That's a safe bet, because obviously cars are autonomous, so you see there's no driver. Eventually runs into the airport and realizes that the plane is late from Stockholm. It wasn't charged properly there. It has to be recharged here before it can lift to the mountains. So that's a typical day in a life in the future, but when in the future? And what we leave people here is the insight that there are actually already people in your city living a good life within the planetary boundaries. And that is comforting. It's based on the sci-fi idea that the future is already here, a bit unevenly distributed. And that will help politicians and policymakers when they realize this. They realize that they will now refocus their attention to what would be the original concept, to make life better for a lot of people. We should never talk about climate. We should never talk about sustainability. Sustainability is only boring when you talk about sustainability. But talking about quality of life, what is that? It is possible to have a high quality of life with low emission today. It's something comforting to know that in the future will be guys running around, and they will have circular recycling recycled suits, and they will still commit adultery. There will still be people smoking way too much and getting two-way drunk on Fridays on circular wine. When we talk about that, it's something we can relate to emotionally. We know that happen, and that's make the future seem a bit closer. So when we look at the vision of the future, what we did in the past is sort of paint sketches in the future that was sort of very bleak and abstract. We then went into color and high D, and sort of that was slightly close to where we are now. And we argue with this method, that in order to get people to emotionally engage, to talk about the emotional future instead, we should start using another method. And that way we can feel that it's actually comforting to know that the future will be much more like what we already know. And if nothing else, you can also rely on that there always will be white guys sitting underneath trees. Thank you.
Let's hang out by the tables, Per. Well, we really understand fully now why you're called Chief Storyteller in the Viable Cities concept, well, just in general. You are also a journalist and author, and you've been developing this method. And I'm just curious, why did you choose to, how did the process and why did you choose to place the scenarios so close into the future instead of sort of 25 years ahead?
Because no one's been that far in the future, so we cannot relate to it. I mean, in fact, when the first iPhone arrived, and this data that suggests that the majority of the emissions that we have is arrived after the arrival of the iPhone, so it's a pretty new thing. We didn't expect the world to change. We said it's slightly the same as now, but we look up at things different. So in order to get people to change, you cannot sort of do something they can not emotionally relate to. Mm-hmm. But doing all these kinds of quirks that we do in everyday life, I mean, I think that we've been overselling the future. It should be much more sort of relatable, and that's why we need to use going from the science to fiction, but use a page from the science fiction playbook.
So how are people relating to the stories?
I mean, we've got a number of reactions. When we did this in the story in Malmö, when our hero gets a bike stolen, and the municipality was, no, we fixed that problem. Nobody gets bike stolen. Like, of course, you get the bike stolen at Triangeln. That's a part of being in Malmö, you know. You got your bike stolen there as well.
I did.
So we have to put those sort of stuff into the friction, the functional friction, the social friction that we can relate to. I mean, what we saw here is a day in a life that is completely within planetary boundaries, and you don't even think about it.
It's not fancy, it's really everyday life, huh?
It's borderline boring. I mean, one of the things that we got when I was interviewed in the BBC, and they said, well, your life seems fairly boring. We're like, yes, it is. Our life are boring. We shouldn't be polishing them. This is how we live. Swedes are boring.
And you said in your keynote here that we shouldn't be talking about sustainability, but we should talk about lifestyle and just enjoying life.
The quality of life concept is so much better. The quality of life could be different from both of us, but we still understand the general idea. And it's about finding more quality of life. And then you realize that you might not need a car, for example, because it's better to have access to cars and to own the stuff. Well, that gives me high quality of life. And then also you don't have a nerd saying...
I love it. So, Per, you've been doing pilots in 23 cities. Tell us, how did it work? 23, that's a lot.
No, we have 23 cities we work with. We've done in 3 cities.
Sorry,
and now
23 cities in total, and pilots in 3.
Pilots in 3.
Umeå, Malmö, and Göteborg.
And so now, since we're launching today, we will also make the method publicly available this year. And so other cities around the world can use it. We will keep doing pilots and sort of release updates of this transformative practice.
So how can other cities, I'm sure other cities all over the world are like, we want this. Yeah. How can they access this tool and this process?
We will make it available on our website shortly, so keep an eye on it. And we will start sort of explaining the concept a bit more.
So when is shortly?
We don't know exactly yet. I mean, we don't either have time to wait too much, but we just want things to be done. But it's basically steal what you can, and from Sweden with love.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Per Grankvist.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. We now move on to another important and related topic. researchers around the globe are increasing our understanding of how to act on the climate emergency. The latest IPCC report has made clear that the world already possesses all the knowledge and technology in order to limit temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But much of that knowledge and technology fails to be put in practice to accelerate climate action. This session coming up now will highlight 2 examples in which presently available technology democratizes climate knowledge and simplifies decision-making, and thereby increasing local governments' ability to drive science-based change. So join our leading experts here who will share their insights on using carbon budgets in public awareness digital campaigns, they will call the climate checker, and systems thinking to better plan, engage in, and execute on the Paris Agreement. We'll talk about how a coalition of nonprofits, advocacy groups have used digital tools to bring this issue forward among Swedish municipalities to reinstate carbon budgets to what they should be, the instruments directing our policies and actions. So we're joined by some experts, and we'll start off by listening to Tomer Shalit. He is CPO and founder of ClimateView, and he'll start by sharing his keynote. You have the floor, Tomer. Just join us, please. Please give him a warm hand.
Hi.
Wonderful to see you, Tomer. Fire away.
So, hi, I'm Tomer Shalit. I used to work before my current job as an agile business consultant. That's about helping companies transform their organizations to solve complex problems. It's often used in software development. I had really nice customers, looked really good on LinkedIn, but the climate monkey was really bugging me, feeling that this agile thing, which seemed to work, was so good. Why on earth was I using my time and my life to try and help banks and insurance companies with slightly better profit margins, instead of using these methodologies which are about how to solve complex problems in the ever-changing solution space with multiple stakeholders, a clear goal but unknown path towards it? Why not just try and use this for something much more important, the biggest problem of all, the climate transition? And I thought, what would happen if one looked at Sweden as one big agile project, and built a first prototype of an idea of what one does is collects all the data which was then known about Sweden's transitions, because Sweden had just come out with their ambitious plan for net zero 2045, collected all those thousands of pages of data and tried to create some kind of insight out of it, some kind of big picture. And did that through our... This clicker is not working. So I'll get that going. Did that through our... Is somebody fixing presentation? I will do without one. Did that with a big 4-meter-long poster, which we brought in front of government, and which was a summary of Sweden's entire transition. There, it looks like something has come up. There is it coming. Good. It's there, but it's not there. There, thank you. 4-meter-long poster summarizing Sweden's entire transition. So we did that for the government, but then the question was, now what? And because it was this idea of taking massive amounts of data, trying to create sense out of it, sense-making out of lots of data, breaking down the big transition into small pieces. What do we do with it? Well, we started looking at cities, because of course cities are 70% of the world's emissions. More than 2,000 cities have declared some kind of climate emergency and had a net zero commitment. And only 18% of those cities have climate action plans which actually are in line with the Paris Agreement. So we launched ClimateOS. It's a platform, a software platform that takes data from all kinds of places and tries to make sense out of it. Because the thing is, cities have a lot of data today. There's data all over the place. And usually when they start making plans, they start looking for more data. But actually, data isn't the problem. the problem is what to do out of all this data, how to get insight, how to build evidence-based plans based on this data. We started this talking about the facts are there, why we're not acting on it. It's the same thing with data. There is lots of data, but just that poured over us doesn't help. We need to make insight out of it. So that's what the ClimateOS platform is. It provides impact intelligence. And the secret of how we've succeeded with this, and I'm proud to say we have over 150 cities using our platform today. That's interesting in the sense that it's gone very, very fast. When we started this 5 years ago, climate action planning wasn't even known by many cities. So over this short period, over 150 cities using the platform. But the reason is that we've succeeded to do this is because it is through collaboration. Collaboration with everyone. So I talked about this poster with the Swedish government. That was one thing to come around and share the vision with. And as Per is talking about, it's another kind of storytelling, actually, a vision of where to head with help of data. And through all these cities that we've worked with and all these different partners, and through the collaboration, we have been able to make this happen. And I think, very much believe that that is the key. There's no way for any single entity, any single company, any single government, any single city to do this by themselves. This has to be done through collaboration at an unprecedented scale, and it has to happen. So we're going to talk about two projects, which Klimatkollen and Frida, please come up. Klimatkollen, a project that we've done together with Vårt barns klimat. And it's an example of how to democratize and get data out to the people. Yeah.
Just hang on a second. I'd like to introduce the next speakers properly, if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
So thanks so much, Tomer. Brilliant presentation. And what you're doing is so key to the transition that is really going to happen. So how about you take a seat in the sofa here? And I'd like to introduce, because we have two fabulous speakers lined up, and they deserve a proper presentation. So with us we have Lisen Schultz. She's sustainability scientist and program director at the Stockholm Resilience Center, and she'll be joining us shortly to discuss how the theoretical concept of systems thinking can make its way out of academia and make a difference in climate action. And we also have with us the brilliant Frida Eklund. She's co-founder of the climate checker, Klimatkollen, and also head of operation at Swedish climate parent organization Våra klimat. And Frida is also co-founder of the global organization Our Kids Climate. And she will speak out about how something as science-based and central to climate action as carbon budgets have been absent from the conversations on climate action. So please, ladies, join us here in the sofa corner. Wonderful. Give them a warm hand. And I'll sit here, and you can choose to either hang out with Tomer, both of you, or if you want to sit Lisa and Lisa. That's perfect. I can see all three at the same time. So wonderful. Lisa, tell us about the cutting-edge research and how this applies to climate action.
So I've studied how people around the world can collaborate and learn to manage the ecosystems that we all depend on, so wetlands and forests and lakes and so on. Mm-hmm. That is also very much a complex problem because we're all connected and all these ecosystems are connected to the climate as well. About half of the emissions that we have emitted are absorbed by these ecosystems. So we need to manage those for survival. And I've studied how that works in UNESCO biosphere reserves. At the Stockholm Resilience Center, we take this systems perspective. So we see people and nature as very much connected. We address this problem as a social ecological systems problem. We also believe that our challenges range from the global to the local, and that we are really connected in that way. So I think it's really exciting to see this tool this platform that Tomer presents, because it now allows that kind of collaboration around the world.
So how long have you been collaborating?
Well, we've known each other for a few years, but I joined the board of ClimateView just very recently. Yeah.
So, Tomer, how are you putting this theory into practice?
I'll be a bit mathematical here, but what we've done with ClimateOS, the platform, is built what's called an agent-based model. It's a way to look at the climate transition with small building blocks we call transition elements, each one of them describing one shift of how to fulfill a future need, but with a new mechanism. So each one by themselves, these models, aren't that hard to describe. Then, of course, as Lisen describes, all these things are interconnected. So we pour these agents into a machine and they start simulating and they pulling and competing with each other. And there you can start building an ever-evolving model of the transition. So what we're trying to do here is to basically create a platform which is you can plug in more and more building blocks. So as we learn more, as new cities join the platform or new research comes in, we can plug in ever more new pieces that make the model more and more complex and start understanding what resources will vanish first or where the system boundaries are lying.
So, Tomer, is anybody else doing something like this, or is it completely unique?
So within research, this kind of system modeling has been done probably since computers came into research. So that's been done in many places. I think what's unique is what was done is basically the effort of doing it so closely with so many cities, going from basically from research to actual application with users straight away to change politics so fast. So that's why we've been able to push a solution that has come further than anyone else. And basically the speed from research and data to actual application has to happen so fast, and that's what we're trying to make happen.
Indeed. So Frida, you are head of the Våra Klimat organization, and translated to English it's Our Kids Climate, which is also the global organization. And your last big project was really centered around a science-based report and approach. Can you please tell us more about this?
Well, so I thought I'll try and unpack a little bit what the climate checker is, or Klimatkollen. So it's basically taking all this complex stuff that exists, all the data, and we're thinking, so what does it mean in practice for citizens? What do we need to know? So how can we make some data available, and what kind of data do we need to know about? So Klimatkollen shows all the Swedish 290 municipalities a scorecard for how they're performing on the climate transition. Not everything, so we've kind of selected some key goodies from all the data that's out there to show how are the municipalities doing on climate change. And that's data very much emission-based, so how have they performed historically in terms of carbon emissions, where are they heading if they continue like today, and where should they go? How quickly do we need to really cut emissions in line with the Paris Agreement? Excuse me. And so what we use for the platform, which is it's mobile first, it's open data, it's open source code software so that anyone can go in and help us improve the data. It's kind of a gap minder for climate, if you like, aimed at citizens. So it's on the bottom is carbon budgets. So what we've done is we've worked with WWF and scientists at Uppsala University to develop and to calculate a carbon budget for Sweden according to the Paris Agreement, 1.5 degree, and including historical emissions. So it's a very sharp budget for Sweden nationally. Now, then we've collaborated with ClimateView. We used the same methodology to actually give each municipality, 290 of them in Sweden, their own carbon budget. So we're not just showing the emissions in these municipalities, but we're also comparing it to how much space is left for them to actually emit. And that then means that the curve needs to drop really rapidly. So why we're doing this, basically the purpose of this platform is to give citizens more facts and data that they then can use. And some of the impacts that have been really interesting since we launched in March is well, number one, we've seen a lot of local media stories writing about this. Over 50 media stories locally are asking questions about, wait, what does this mean? What are carbon budgets? Why aren't emissions dropping? What's actually including in these targets? Asking exactly the right questions to politicians, to local groups, and to companies in their own municipalities. So that's the first impact. The second impact is that we've seen a whole lot of local groups use the data. So they're using their data for their local advocacy work. And that's really the purpose of why we're doing this. We're showing data to make sure that we can give citizens more tools to create more pressure, because we really need to speed up the transition. We need tools and people that work inside the system, and we also need public pressure to actually help us get there quicker. And the third impact is that we've seen also at the national level, people have been writing about this, they're really interested in like the carbon budgets and what they mean. Concretely, the national carbon budget means that at current levels, we have 3.5 years left of emissions in Sweden, if we really take the Paris Agreement seriously. And that's a number that's now figuring in the public debate, and also the Climate and Environment Minister has been responding to that number. So people are interested in this concept of that there is a sort of a finite number of tons that we can emit, and what is that number, and how can we use that for the climate transition?
That's a lot of impact.
Yes.
Congratulations. So, Tomer, this seems like a novel approach to use carbon budgets. Why aren't we doing this more and globally?
In a sense, it's not a novel approach. It's just that we've done it much faster and more efficiently. I think that so. And I guess, as I said before, it's a question of going from research to application as fast as possible. We don't have time to wait for for the usual cycles. So it hasn't done before, because scientists' job is not to disseminate knowledge. It's to write good papers that are peer-reviewed. There's a lot of bit of a ranting, but there's a lot of consultants who actually make money by actually making these things slightly hard to access, because then they make a living on disseminating this knowledge. And this is where I think software is at its best. If you want to use digitalization for anything, it is to spread knowledge as fast as possible. So I don't know. It's not a novel approach. It's just that we're doing it faster, and as a collaboration here with Uppsala University, WWF, a private company, research institutions, other research institutions. So novelty is in the cross collaboration and the speed.
Yeah, it's how you use the approach that's novel, so to speak. So, Lisen, from a researcher's perspective, what are the big blockers for you as a researcher and scientist to get the science out and be applicable in society?
Well, I think, just as Tomer said, we focus very much on getting the research right, and you tend as a researcher to become quite narrow and reductionist in your approach. So you publish very small pieces of information that is correct, but it's not actionable in itself. So we need these intermediaries to make sense of it all. We also need interdisciplinary research, where we bring together social scientists and natural scientists to make sense of the situation that we're in as humanity, where we become really a dominant force of change on the planet, and yet we're still fundamentally dependent on a stable climate and living ecosystems. And that requires this type of bringing together of the understanding and connecting it quickly to people who can act on this data and information and make sense of it. So that's why a software tool like this is an amazing development that now allows for that at a much faster and larger scale than before.
So what else do you need, Lisen?
As a researcher?
Yes, to make this happen quicker.
Well, I think it also requires, better incentives and possibilities for researchers to engage in both interdisciplinary research and what we call transdisciplinary research. So actually working together with actors outside academia already in the problem formulation, so that the knowledge that we generate is truly actionable from the very beginning. And today our academic structures are not set up in that way. We are incentivized to do very disciplinary multidisciplinary research and focus, on our specific things. So I think we need more support for those kinds of collaboration, and it is growing, I must say. So that's a good sign.
That's hopeful. So Frida, you're our climate communications expert. From your perspective, what is needed to speed up? And I mean, you're doing fantastic stuff here together, all three of you, from different perspectives and aspects. But what is needed more to bridge the gap between science and the public awareness?
I think really what Lisen is saying as well is like the bits are out there, but sometimes you need an intermediary to kind of help you communicate it. I'm part of this, civil society, and our job is to, take what's out there, complex reports, and try to find nuggets in there to communicate to a wider public, and then stimulate engagement, get people to do something with that. And I think sometimes that connection, sometimes we find reports that have been published for years, and we're like, why hasn't someone just sent us this amazing report? We could have done something really great with this, with the people that we reach, which are primarily parents. So I think that, and I think also making available public data. Like Tomer was saying, sometimes we find that data in this climate checker project, we've found that we've been really digging for data, and it's stuck in complex databases that no one can navigate who's a normal human. Or it's written in, like those gold nuggets are in like a really long science report, or they're kind of a media story that kind of comes and goes. So we're really interested in like how can we make this data publicly available all the time, like constantly changing, and that's why we kind of built this platform to kind of host this data, be kind of a shop window, if you like, for climate-related data. That should always be available to anyone who wants to know more about it. So I think that's the second one. And I think also being really clear about target audience. Like collaborations are needed because we all reach very different audiences, and all those audiences are needed. We need to really quickly get everyone on board. So then these kind of collaborations are crucial for getting us there on time with the speed that we need.
Thank you, Frida. From your perspective, Tomer, I mean, all this data is stuck somewhere. How can we make it more easily accessible? And as we upload more data in this crucial transition, how can we make it not stuck and hard to find?
By being more specific about what we need the data for. I have to go back to that. So often there's discussion like, oh yeah, but we need data, and how do we make it easier to access, etc. But if just making data available is very hard, because if you don't know how it's going to be consumed, as one says, it doesn't make. But by having the demand on data and having the demand on what to do with it, then you start. Then data will come out. So I think that's the problem: is that you can't sort of solve it on the supply side. We have to demand the right kind of data, but then you have to have people be responsive to actually making sure that that happens. So it's like the government data we're working with now, which in essence, we have taken big government Excel spreadsheets and put them into real databases so that one can start using them. And we shouldn't really need to do that. That's something the government should do, and I think they will.
So it's more of an upstream approach.
Yes, and it's the same as I started saying about cities. I've actually never come to a city, I think this is true, I've never come to a city that doesn't say we don't have enough data. It's always like we don't have enough, and you could say, oh, is this trying to, sometimes it's a bit of analysis paralysis, and we don't know what to do, so let's just find some more data somewhere, collect it. But if you don't know what you want to do with the data, data means nothing. So, because I'll talk about precision of data, etc. But if you know where you want to go, then you can start deciding what data you need, and actually need often less data to start going in the right direction, and that data can become richer as you run around the right direction. I'll give a very simple example. Every single city thinks they have to know their exact baseline, their current situation just now in the emissions to start acting forward. But I'll take an extreme example. I don't need to know anything about the city's emissions to know that if I take 5,000 people that take the car to work and they start cycling instead, that is 140 grams per citizen I save and citizen kilometer. So this is one example where it's actually not a question about more data, it's a question about knowing what to do with your data, how to operationalize it, the way you want to apply it, and then you're going to start getting better data.
Thank you, Tomer. Excuse me, Lisen, I'm turning back to you again here. A research interest of yours is how leadership can be facilitating both difficult, complex socio-economical transitions. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, well, we've come to realize that in all of these complex collaborations where you work towards, a shared interest, but with multiple interest groups, you need key individuals, key actors who can really facilitate this and show leadership. And they need to have, be systems thinkers, but they also need to be, understanding how people work and so on. So we've also studied this concept of keystone actors who have a disproportionate influence on a system. And we have this theory of change where if you feed these people with the right information and the right opportunities for learning, they can shift behaviors which will in turn shift many more people's behaviors. So based on that, we've developed leadership training for CEOs and chairpersons of influential companies, where we connect them to each other and to climate and sustainability scientists to understand the situation, make sense of the data, and find their way of acting from their respective positions in a way that supports this transition to a world where everyone can meet their needs within the planetary boundaries. So that's how we try to work with that kind of concept.
So what role does technology play in this?
Well, as I said, I think it's amazing that we now have this opportunity to bring all of this data together in real time to facilitate this collaboration between citizens and cities and governments, and where science can come in and quickly lead to action at a scale that was not possible before, when all we could do was read reports and talk to each other and send letters. So I think that pace of change that we can see now can really work in our favor. But technology will only support this transition if there are people using this technology with that kind of vision and that kind of shared goal. So technology in itself, I don't think will solve anything. It's what we use technology for, and that's why it's amazing to hear you, Tomer, also how you realize that this agile approach could be used for a much more important problem than what you had done before. So we need more people realizing that. How can we use our tools and technology for this common goal that we all have?
You all three represent different sectors of society, but how can we facilitate more cross-border facilitation and collaboration, and using technology, putting in science and putting in communications to speed up the spread of knowledge and hence the transition? Tomer. How did you find each other, and how did you start collaborating?
The agile approach is to set more deadlines closer. That's a simple answer. So for Klimatkollen here, we had Frida coming saying, this should be done in 3 months. Shouldn't take more.
Oh dear.
And then we all work together with very, very tight deadlines, but not making it perfect. Just getting it out to the door.
So it's a good enough approach.
A good enough approach, but with clear deadlines. That's the thing. Good enough to the next deadline, because then you can have it. So I'm saying this as an example because I actually what we have done now together is one of those situations. But it shouldn't be like the next event. I think that's it's to work together with close deadlines in our case would be towards cities, helping them to the next level of climate action planning, and doing it that way.
Thank you, Tomer. And Frida, your theory of change here, what works?
So I think clarity of purpose. It's like if you look at Climate Checker, I think the success of it is clarity of purpose. Like if you only do one thing, focus on doing that really well. We've scaled away so much in this project that we'd like to show climate risks, local climate risks. We'd like to show all this data that exists. And then when it all boils down to it, well, this beta version now shows emissions. We're saying something about emissions and comparing to the Paris Agreement carbon budgets. So it's like being really clear on purpose, I think, is one. 2, I think people, finding the right people that are, like-minded and driven and really wants to make the transition happen. Otherwise, these projects will fail. And then the 3rd thing, funding. And I think that's where we have really struggled. We have, a great idea, but it's no one's responsibility. Everyone wants it. Everyone thinks it's great that it exists, but it's really difficult to fund it because it's not a business idea. It's not a startup. We're not selling anything. We're just, really doing the government's job. They should be communicating their data for citizens, but it's not really happening at the moment. So funding for us has been the big stumbling block for sure, and continues to be so.
So doing the government's job, Tomer, you sort of sighed a bit there when Frida said it. How do we make the government do their job instead of organizations like Våra, Klimat, which is a not-for-profit but struggling with limited
short
funds.
deadlines and clear examples.
Here we go again.
Again, I think this is the way. I mean, this is the only way, by example. If you want change, you have to do it by example, but you don't have to go all the way. You just have to show the way, show the path.
So, but how about your perspective, Lisen?
Well, I think a key, in addition to what you've already said, is to scale down. This, for example, we have this concept of planetary boundaries at the Stockholm Resilience Center that really looks at the planet as a whole. What are the things that we really need to attend to if we want to maintain this planet in a habitable state for people. You have to scale that down to something that people can act on, like a carbon budget for a city, so that it actually makes sense.
Very tangible.
Very tangible. And also, I think, for collaborations to work, there needs to be a mutual benefit, and everyone involved needs to both see something that they can contribute and something to get out of it. And then normally works after a while, but it takes dedication.
Well, thank you for your dedication, Tomer, Frida, and Lisen, and for your collaboration. That's obviously very fruitful, and well, the world is watching, so this might spread. We hope so. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We now continue and introduce another educational platform called the Climate Educational Tool for Suppliers. And I'm going to hand it over now to my dear colleague, Nick Nuttall.
So the good news is, as we know, every day we can see that on the UN Race to Zero, many companies have actually joined it, set science-based targets, and they are trying to reduce their emissions in line with what is needed. But many companies also have the challenge that a lot of the products they produce and the services they deliver rely on supply chains, with myriads of companies, large and small, and often crisscrossing continents, providing parts or materials to the company, making the final product or service. By some estimates, these indirect, or technically known as Scope 3 emissions, make up 65 to 95% of a corporation or a company's carbon footprint. If companies are to win the UN Race to Zero and halve emissions by 2030, they need to deal with those. But how? Big ones may have the resources, the staff, the money to actually get really stuck into it. But what about the small to medium-sized enterprises? Today we will see the launch of what is called an educational tool, and I think we'll find out that tool is just a short form for something far more interesting. And this tool is there to help those small and medium-sized enterprises. It's perhaps a beginner's guide for some to how to handle this challenge of supply chains and make it an opportunity to decarbonize their businesses. It's a big thanks to the Axfoundation in Sweden, who have been working with Axel Johnson companies, the Swedish Trade Federation, and the Exponential Roadmap Initiative to make this happen. And today we're going to hear from some of the players involved on what this could mean for stepped-up climate action. I'd like to introduce first Viveka Risberg, who's Program Director for Sustainable Production and Consumption at the Axfoundation, which is a not-for-profit organization. She's a creative and operational sustainability expert with experience from different angles and platforms. Come on down, please. Choose a spot there. Also, Josefin, Hård, Sustainability Manager at the Nordic region's leading beauty chain, Kicks. Josefin has been recognized within the Axel Johnson Group for her work, both in terms of the conscious product range and her work on inclusion and diversity. Super to see you. Then we've also got Karin Wimmer, Sustainability Coordinator at Axfood, Purchasing and Logistics, with broad sustainability experience from both food, retail, and the logistics centre. We've got a bigger couch today. I don't know if anybody spotted that. It's much bigger. We had this black one, which was a bit unusual, but now we've got a big grey one, so that's cool. And last but not least, we've got Magnus Nikkarinen. I'm sure I said that completely wrong. You'll have to clear that up for me, Magnus. Senior Policy Director for Sustainability at Svensk, which is the Swedish Trade Federation, which gathers around 9,000 members within the general retail, food retail, and wholesale sectors. And he has a master's degree in environmental and natural resource economics, and so on. And finally, Johan Falk, co-founder and CEO of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. Come on down. It's a bit tight, that sofa. If anybody wants to sit on that chair or the kettle drum that we've got over there, you can imagine you're a tom-tom musician, but if you're comfortable, that's absolutely fine. Great. Nice to see you all here. Very good indeed. So, Viveka, tell us about this tool. What is it for? What is it monitoring and reporting? And we discussed a little bit earlier, tool is a bit shorthand for something a bit more exciting.
Absolutely. It's actually an interactive website for small and medium-sized companies all over the world who needs to get started and take action on their climate journey. So it's, you can say it's for beginners to support them to set targets in line with science and set strategies in order to reduce GHG emissions in line with science.
Okay. And of course the magic question, which is it unique? Is there anything else like it out there? Why do we feel this is special?
Well, as far as we know, because we made a pre-study last year, we haven't found anything like it, which is free and open access to anyone. There are some solutions which are locked and private, but this is really, working for any company in any sector, and it's free. And so I think it's actually world unique in that sense.
And do you think that I don't know, when we say small and medium-sized enterprises, does that range from somebody who runs news agents on the corner of the street next door, or are we looking at companies with, say, several hundred employees or tens of employees? I don't know where it begins and ends, small and medium-sized enterprises.
Well, I guess that, the challenges are the same. It's actually, you have to work with renewable energy and climate-smart processes. Doesn't matter, where you work. But I think that since we are working with retail companies mainly, it might be, perfect for retail companies. But it doesn't matter if you sell or buy or produce clothes or electronics or food. You can use it anyway. So, yeah.
Okay, Johan, you're with the Exponential Roadmap. Firstly, the question is, what is required by the companies in line with the science?
Yes, Nick. To be in line with the 1.5 ambition, what do we expect from companies? Well, science is very clear. We need to halve emissions by 2030 towards net zero. What does that mean for a company? Well, it means basically you should at least halve your emissions by 2030. And you need to do that with your own emissions, but also through the value chain. We also expect companies to work to align their business models also with 1.5 and also to contribute to the transformation in society. But it's not sufficient just to set targets. It's actually all about setting a plan, take action, and also report your results transparently and honestly.
I think it's important for the ordinary person to understand. You might buy something that says made in Sweden, right? And you think it's all the stuff inside has come from Sweden, but it may be just made in Sweden, right? All the parts might come from other parts of the world, right? And it's the same with many, many other products as well. Some will actually come from Sweden, but others may not. And that supply chain is vast, Why is it important to engage the supply and value chain? I think you probably answered that in a...
Yeah, because companies, you can't basically do this halving or reaching zero emissions on your own. You have to do it together with your suppliers, together with your customers, setting the same compass direction. That is the way to achieve it. So you have to work together to achieve it, basically. That's the answer.
And finally, how does this tool, this gateway, this new interactive system link into the bigger perspective? Because of course you have things like the business playbook, the exponential roadmap, the small and medium-sized, small and medium enterprise climate hub, which was launched not so long ago, and you have things like the supply chain leaders, a lot of organizations, right? How does this link into this big picture?
Yeah, as Viveka said, this focus particularly on education of suppliers. So it is very complementary, and it's also linked to these other resources. I don't expect we will have one tool solving everything, but complementary tools. And it's based on this overall scientific narrative, which is very important.
Right, so it's underpinned by science, which is absolutely critical on this, yeah. Okay, let's go to Karin. You're with Axfood. How do you at Axfood work with your suppliers on the climate issue? And how do you expect this tool to be helpful?
Yeah, well, as a food retail company, we are working with suppliers, and our largest emissions are down in the supply chain. So for us, it's crucial to find a way to assist our suppliers to actually actively limit their emissions. And apart from assisting them in, or encouraging them in joining initiatives and projects, we do have a target that all our private label suppliers should have their own climate reduction tools to reach net zero emissions by 2030, actually, in their own operations, but also we place requirements on them that they should have climate aims in their respective supply chain. And the reality is that we know it's difficult for them. They ask us, how do we do it? So we hope that this will help them to know the why and how, and guide them through this. So, yeah, that's the result we hope is that actually factory managers understand what this is all about, and that they start to measure, start to set targets, and that we, together with them, can actually lower the total impact on the food supply chain. So.
Interesting. And Axfood, you're Swedish-based, yeah?
Yes.
And do you have a sense, just for the audience, different parts of the world that are in this supply chain? Is it Europe? Does it go beyond
Europe? Asia, Latin America, a bit less Africa, but a lot of Asian and suppliers, of course.
So it really does crisscross continents in terms of,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one feature with this tool is also that it has an invitation section. So we will be able to talk to our European suppliers to share it with their sub-suppliers. That's also one key feature which we look forward to start using.
Yeah. I'm trying to imagine this supply chain, aren't you? I'm trying to imagine, buying something today in the shops from Axfood or whatever, and then imagining where did that come from? There may be something on the labeling, but trying to think that in the end there's some farmer somewhere in Latin America, right? In the
Many
field.
farmers.
Incredible, isn't it? Super, thank you. Josefin, now, Kicks.
Yes.
Does everybody know Kicks here? Hooray! Hands up over there, hands up. Oh, she's not so sure. Yes, she is. Okay, fine. You do now. Is there a need for this? Do you have a need for this tool?
Yes, absolutely. And just like Johan and Karin mentioned, the largest part of the emissions are in the supply chain for the vast majorities of companies. And in order to address these emissions, there's necessary to have a common knowledge base. And with this climate education tool, it provides guidance on how to map and plan and set targets on your emissions. And we also hope that this tool will inspire and really help our suppliers in their climate journey.
I see that this your company is very into conscious cosmetics, if I can put it that way, and inclusivity, diversity. That's not often it is within the climate change story, of course, but you think of more of the Sustainable Development Goals. I could imagine a tool like this one day being evolved that goes even beyond just the science-based targets, but even have another side to it, which could be some of the SDGs, which are a bit harder to nail down as science-based targets, but inclusivity and diversity.
That would be a dream.
That would be a dream, yeah. Magnus, I'm sure I mullered, as they say in English, your last name, so can you clear that up for me?
It's Nikkarinen.
Okay, all right, there we go. You shouldn't let a British person on any stage trying to say other countries' names. Swedish Trade Federation, 9,000 members.
Yes.
Mostly small and medium-sized enterprises in many, many different sectors. Is this relevant? Yeah, for textiles, electronics? I think you touched on that from the beginning, Viveka, but yeah, give us your perspective.
It has been touched, a couple of times, and definitely, as you were mentioning, every retailer has a supplier, every supplier has a supplier, and then we can continue for quite a long time. Everyone has a supply, regardless of which sector we're talking about, and I think this is what is so interesting about this tool, that is generic. It will work both regarding size, as you were mentioning before. We have members which is really, really big, of course, but we have a lot of small ones as well. And looking at this tool, it will work for everyone, regardless of size. And you can take different parts of it, and you will see it quite soon here how it looks. Yeah. But also regarding different retailers and different sectors we're talking about. Textile and food is of course quite natural, but we have other sectors as well. And we know from experience and surveys we do that it is not only textile and food that it's getting more attention among the retailers. It is also different kind of sectors like books and garden retailers as well.
I thought you were going to say garden gnomes for a second there. I was just waiting. garden. I wasn't sure. But I mean, I think a lot of people. I mean, on our shows and things like that, we have a lot of large companies who you know, big companies, Scania, Volvo, these sort of people. But actually, in the world, you know, there are many, many small and medium-sized enterprises that basically are the backbone of many economies, and people forget that, right? So what they do is also important. We're never going to deal with climate change unless we help the small and medium-sized enterprises to decarbonize their operations, supply chains, etc. Good. We've come to the end of this session. I hope you enjoyed it. Good. Everyone's smiling. That's nice. How many people know about Kicks? One. Oh, it's got big now, you see. Just fantastic. We're now going to have a demonstration of this tool. I'm going to call on Sami Tonikowski of the Axfoundation, and he's Chief of Sustainability at the Foundation. And he's also an environmental professional with 20 years of experience, leading initiative to bring balance between people and the planet. Sami, where are you? Come on down, you have the floor.
Thank you so much.
Do you want to do it from here?
Yeah, that'd be a pleasure.
You can look into that there. I'm going to go and sit down over here and watch it.
And if you don't mind, just a minor correction. I represent AskKauko, the company that provided the technology for the tool. So
how the heck could we have got that one wrong?
No worries, mate.
Oh yeah, you're Sami up to your Axfoundation. Well, you can be Axfoundation later.
I could be. I totally could be.
Thank you. AskKauko. Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. Excellent.
Cheers. So I think the audience is well primed to actually see what the tool looks like. So let's see how the technology works. Here we go. As I mentioned, I represent AskKauko, and we are about to launch a new platform for companies to start measuring and reporting their emissions across supply chains and visualize their way towards reaching net zero with interactive roadmaps. This is a very big milestone for us as a company. Over the past 4 years, we've developed over 60 bespoke projects for companies of different sizes, different sectors, public sector, academia, and NGOs, help them to visualize their sustainability impacts of their actions. As a company, we have a purpose of increasing the understanding of how to make the world system more sustainable. And I think the tool that we're about to see represents, at least from our company's perspective, hopefully the most impactful project so far. But it also marks probably the 61st and the last project that we're going to be doing. So now we're moving from bespoke projects into an online platform over the summer. So it means a lot to us. So let's have a look at what the tool actually looks like. Here it is. So you arrive to this tool via a couple of different ways, potentially. You can receive an invitation that Karin was referring to earlier, so companies, buyers can communicate with their suppliers and send invitations which they can activate to come to use the tool. Through a simple registration process, you get to start using the tool. Similarly, you can arrive to the tool via just going to the address climateeducationtool.com. So it's not exclusive to companies who have received invitation only. As mentioned, it has SME focus, supply chain focus, and it's science-based. So when you start to use the actual tool, it consists of two main components. First one is the educational component. That consists of several different modules that follow a logical sequence in terms of what would a company do when they would start their process to start taking climate action to reduce emissions, measure them, and report them. Everything is offered in bite-sized kind of packages of information, not to overwhelm people. And then at the bottom, there's the second element that was also referred to earlier by Karin as well, talking about the questionnaire that provides bespoke guidance for companies in terms of how to take climate action depending on the way they answer. We're going to have a look at that in a second. Good. Our primary focus is to really help the companies not to dwell so much in the why this is so important, because I think many of us already know the imperative. It was already mentioned how important it is to address the emissions from the supply chain that actually reach over 90% of the total emissions by the private sector, but also landing ourselves to the current consensus around what needs to be done in terms of reaching or staying below 1.5 Celsius. Once you've reached a module end, you finish the module and you arrive then back to the main screen. And by doing that, because you do go through this registration process, you actually are able to follow up where you are when, in terms of your journey through the modules. We provide easy to understand information. We want to take this out from the community of practice. We are not talking from sustainability practitioners to sustainability practitioners. We're talking about millions of farmers, for example, in different continents, people with, at least in the start, limited understanding what we are talking about. So we try to decrypt the information and make it more understandable. But at the same time, because we are based in science, we try to kind of pay heed to the language that the world is now speaking. So for example, when we talk about the emission sources, where you can start to reduce your emissions, we've taken the approach to divide the emission categories based on the scopes, which are 1, 2, 3, which are widely understood by everybody, but not widely understood people necessarily outside the community of practice. And that's why we break this information down into further details. But we are not going to leave it up to the level of theory, but you can go and explore, for example, under the different categories and see what it really means. If I'm a small company buying electricity, so what can I do about this? How can I reduce my emissions? So first of all, how do I even measure what my emissions are at the moment? So this tool gives you idea, first of all, this is how you can proceed, and also provides inspiration through case studies in terms of how others have found solutions together, not only leaving the suppliers to work by themselves, but like Axfood, Karin mentioned, you really want to engage and solve these problems together. Moving further, then we have at the end, we have a section called definitions and links, which actually provides all the key terminology, concepts, as well as those resources that we were talking about together in one place. So this really is a gateway for the SMEs to first get that basic understanding, where are we, what can we do, and then start collaborating with others. There was mentioning of the 1.5 Celsius business playbook, for example, the SME Climate Hub, etc. Obviously useful resources, but maybe after you got the basics first. So this kind of serves as a really good primer. This tool is going to be only as valuable as the level of usage, I would say, and the level of usage meaning how many companies, individuals are using it, and how useful they find it. And this is not a one-off tool. We hope and expect that people to come back. So you can invite suppliers as well as colleagues using these features that we have built in here. And you can also start having a dialogue using this platform as a way to communicate between buyers and suppliers. Once we have completed all the educational modules, you are able to explore the second element, which is the more kind of customized feature of this entire tool, which is the questionnaire. It runs through a series of questions. There's 10 main questions divided under different scopes, 3 scopes, and then there's a component for setting targets. And depending on the sequence how you answer to these questions, you always get bespoke, tailored guidance in terms of what is it that you can do in your company. And at the end of the questionnaire, you also receive a summary report that then gives you not only the summary of your answers and the guidance, but a checklist of concrete actions that you can take in your company. And you can take this to your managers, you can take this to your shop floor. And once you've completed these actions, you can go and update the answers. You've kind of gone to a level up, maybe to the next stage. Update your answers, and off you go and keep using this tool. I think we've come to the end to present the basic features of this tool. My sincere hope is that a lot of companies and individuals will find this useful in your journey towards Race to Zero. And please give us some feedback, and we would truly appreciate it. And go and check this out at climateeducationtool.com, because climate change is everybody's business. Thank you.
Good. Sami, thank you very much. Why don't you come and join us here? Sure. Johan's gone, so we have some space. Okay, quickly, tell me, so what is AskKauko? Who is Kauko, by the way? But
here's a really good story. In the audience, somewhere in the dark, we have the CEO of this company, and it's actually his father who has given the name to our company.
All right, where is he?
And I shouldn't be telling this journey. Hello. There is Klaus Mattilainen. It's his dad.
Okay.
Their family's company have been exporting clean tech and providing basically consultancy services to clean tech companies in international markets, and they realized how difficult it is to communicate the positive impacts from sustainability perspective of these technology solutions.
Right.
And on that premise, this company was set up a few years ago to help to convey that understanding of how these solutions can make the world a better place. And that's AskKauko.
This project itself, was this a particular challenge or?
It wasn't easy. We had a number of different players and stakeholders. We are talking about complicated issues, and we tried to make them look as simple as possible. So there were several kind of elements that we had to kind of tackle, but luckily we had a 1-year process. So we knew from the outset that this is not going to be something that's going to be solved by technological solutions overnight. So.
We were talking about this just earlier before we came on stage, and I mean, I'm very lucky that I'm British because my other languages are absolutely terrible. But lots of people speak, English around the world. But if you go to many parts of the developing world, I mean, really, no, there is no English. And I suppose at some moment in time, if the demand is really there for this, there may be some issue of bringing in the foreign languages as well. I mean, the United Nations struggles really hard. It has 6 official UN languages to get its documents out and its websites operating in 6 languages. It's really tough. We also know in the UN, when I work for it, that actually there are whole swathes of the world, like India, where there's so many different languages and they're quite dominant, and then you think of indigenous languages in, say, Latin America and things like that. It's a big challenge. But if the supply chains are crisscrossing continents right down to small-scale farmers somewhere, maybe the government could be interested in this as an overseas development support project or something like that, because I think that would be very valuable once you've shown you've got the demand. Would you agree, or do we all agree, or am I?
And I think that many of us have quite big experience of working with suppliers and understanding their needs. And for us, it's been from the start very important that this education will be, very accessible for the suppliers, understandable. And we have tried to take their perspective. We have also asked them a lot and tested this education tool on the suppliers. And it will be eventually translated into, first of all, Mandarin, and then probably also more languages, because that's it's so important that it is, relevant for them.
Yeah. And you gave a little glimpse that this is the end of AskKauko's first or second iteration, that you're moving to another iteration. Should we be excited about this?
Yeah, I think you totally
Okay.
I think you totally should. And for me, it's like looking at what we have produced here. So kind of where we are going to coming up with later this summer is going to be a natural continuum of where this tool is going to kind of leave the companies off. And obviously we're not the only ones providing solutions, but we have ours to offer. Yeah. So we are then going to be helping the companies to measure and report their respective emissions, which are only part of the journey. I need to just be kind of careful in terms of not getting too much focused on information and how you manage it, because the needle is only moved by action. And it's really important to remember that also this tool encourages and provides not only information how to measure and report, but how to actually reduce those emissions.
Yeah.
Everything else will follow.
And would there be a follow-up to this then in maybe, 5 years or something, where we can actually look at the impact of this and on emissions, climate change? There needs to be some follow-up, doesn't there, really, to find out how it's contributing?
Am I going to answer that? Yes,
Yeah,
I'm sure there will be. I mean, 5 years is a very long time when we talk about climate. So I'm sure that what we have done now is a piece in the puzzle where we want, suppliers and small and medium companies to get started at all. And I mean, the natural next step would be to start measuring, reporting, and follow up and showing that they are really in line with science. And also showing their buyers that they are working on it, because the buyers, they will not work with other suppliers than the ones who are doing things, in line with science. So that's the future, I think. So everyone has to work with this and show what they're doing.
So we have to end it there. We're just a few seconds over time, but we were right on time. And thank you very much indeed. It sounds very exciting, and I look forward to hearing about how it progresses. I'm sure the audience does too. And if you're a small or medium-sized enterprise out there, or know a small or medium-sized enterprise out there, then they need to know about this, and they can ask KauKo. Okay, thank you very much indeed. This dialogue about transport in the race to zero will touch on the area of decarbonisation, but also circularity, and more importantly, perhaps, collaboration. All three are key to success and in the transition to a fossil-free economy. With me on stage is Stuart Templer, Director Sustainability of Volvo Cars, and Karin Svensson, who's Chief Sustainability Officer of the Volvo Group. Please come and join me on this. It's getting bigger, the sofa, every day. I don't know, by the end of the week, it'll be halfway across the stage. But yeah, great to see you, everybody.
Thanks, Nick.
So, Stuart and Karin, now, we started, I think we did, because I wasn't looking at it because it was right behind me, but I think we started with a film, with a short recap of the UN conference on the environment in Stockholm in 1972. And I suppose my first question to both of you is, Yeah, 72. It's 50 years ago. I think I was in school actually. Maybe you guys weren't even bored. I don't know. But what did it do in terms of influencing Volvo at that time? Because it was one company. Yeah.
If I shall start.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually at that conference that we pledged to be part of the solution. And since then, care for the environment has been part of both Volvo brands. And I think it's fair to say that we have been working with sustainability and limiting our impact on the environment ever since in different ways. And we have been talking about it and taking action long before it became mainstream. So from 1972 until 1999, when Volvo was divided into two brands, Volvo Cars, Volvo Group, and until today, we have tried to lead both our companies in environmental innovation.
Yeah. So I can give some examples of that. So in 1976, we invented one of the world's first catalytic converters called the lambda sonde, which at the time reduced pollutants, tailpipe pollutants, by around 90% at the time, and a variant of that can still be found in every petrol-driven car today. In 1991, you remember there's a big focus on chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, depleting the ozone layer. Mm-hmm. So we produced the world's first CFC-free car. And then in 2012, by the time that Volvo Cars had become a separate company, we also produced the world's first diesel plug-in hybrid vehicle. And of course, plug-in hybrid technology is an important transitional technology towards full electrification. So we have some track record as well of environmental leadership.
Okay. I'm told by my tech crew that, in fact, the film that we were going to show didn't actually roll.
No.
So I think what we're going to do is save that to the end.
Okay.
Because we've gone through the 72 story right now, haven't we? But let's save that film right to the end when we close. That'll be a nice segue.
Good.
Karin, we often hear about pledges. Yeah, pledges for 2030, pledges for 2040, even 2050. But then I've heard you say it's time to turn words into action. So what climate action is Volvo Group taking right now? And perhaps also touch on who Volvo Group is today.
Okay, so let's start with the Volvo Group. We are one of the largest manufacturers of commercial vehicles. That means trucks, buses, construction equipment, machines, and engines. We are present in 190 countries with 100,000 employees, and our products are on the road, on the sea, on construction sites, and in the cities.
Wow.
Then turning to climate action, I think right now, one of the most important actions we can take, that is to help our customers decarbonize. For many companies, the most important CO2 footprint is really their transports. And there we have, as a large global company, a fantastic opportunity to help our customers to decarbonize. We have, since 2019, we have a full fleet of, or a full product range of electric trucks, for example, and we have had electric buses on the road since 10 years back. So I think that is one of the very important actions that we are taking right now. And one of the things that I wanted to mention in connection to that is that infrastructure is such an important thing when it comes to electrifying transports. And I think you will agree with me on that. Electric cars has been around for a little bit longer, but trucks quite recently. And sometimes it becomes a discussion about what comes first, the hen or the chicken. And in our case, then, we decided to do something about this ourselves. So another climate action that we are taking right now is that we have signed an agreement for a joint venture together with two of our competitors, the Traton Group and the Daimler Truck Group, to build charging infrastructure in Europe. So we are planning on building 1,700 charging stations all over Europe, open, of course, for all brands. So that's one example.
Interesting. So all brands, that's quite open.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Stuart, when you hear someone talk about decarbonisation in regards to cars, people think, oh, that's electrification, right? And that's your job done.
Yeah.
You've decarbonised the whole problem. But I think you have said many times, and I think we all share this on the sofa, that it's not just about electrification of the vehicles themselves. There's a bigger story to that.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
So, you know, at Volvo Cars, we recognise we're part of the problem of climate change. So in the latest UNIPCC report, it said that road transport's responsible for around 16% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So we need to be part of the solution. So that's why we're planning to be a fully climate neutral company across our value chain by 2040. And as part of our climate action plan, electrification plays an important role. So we're planning to be a fully electric car company by 2030 without conditions, which is 10 years ahead of the science-based target for our industry. But electrification is not enough. It's not the silver bullet to addressing our industry's climate impact. And we've done what's called life cycle assessments of the carbon impact of our fully electric vehicles across their full lifespan. That's revealed a number of interesting things. Firstly, that the production emissions of a fully electric vehicle are 70% greater than the equivalent internal combustion engine vehicle. That's mainly due to the carbon intensity of battery and steel production. Secondly, if you charge the vehicle with electricity from the global energy mix, the lifetime carbon footprint will be more than 50% greater than if you charge with renewable energy. So we need to reduce emissions across the value chain. And this need to address these emissions is why we have a goal that by 2025 we'll reduce the life cycle emissions per vehicle by 40%. And we're making some good progress towards that. By the first quarter of this year, we'd actually reduce those emissions by 13%. By 13%, that's mainly due to ongoing fleet electrification. So, put simply, you know, electrification itself is not enough.
Yeah, that's right. And I think a lot of the average consumer doesn't realise, or maybe suspects, but doesn't fully realise that there's actually a far bigger story behind all this. And it really is a moonshot, actually. I mean, if you think about the timescales you're talking about. And I'd also add, we had Nigel Topping on the show a couple of times, actually, who's, you know, the UK government's or the UN's climate champion from the UK. And he kept saying that some of the targets that the governments have been setting for, say, the electrification, particularly of cars, keep coming forward, you know? I mean, next thing you know, you're going to wake up tomorrow morning, they're saying you have to fully decarbonise by tomorrow morning at 3 o'clock. I mean, it's happening so fast, yeah?
But we'll move on to that hopefully later, but there's not enough of those targets bound in legislation. One other point on the life cycle carbon footprint is that transparency is really important, including to consumers. So we've published these LCAs. You can Google them, Volvo Cars C40, XC40 Recharge, LCA, and you'll be able to find out all the details. Quite long reports my R&D colleagues have done if people want to delve into them.
Okay, all right. Karin, heavy transport. How do you see it? Because we just heard the decarbonisation in all its glory from Stuart with the cars, but the trucks. So, yeah, it's not just the electrification of the truck, is it? It's more than that, yeah.
It is. I think we see electrification as one of the key ways to solve the issue, and that is, of course, battery electric vehicles, but we are also looking into fuel cell electric vehicles, probably a little bit later into this decade, but that's also part of at least certain transport missions. We also see a role for the combustion engine, then with fossil-free fuels. But for certain missions and in certain markets, there will be a small, tiny part left where we need to use still the internal combustion engine. So, of course, we see the rollout of electrical vehicles depending on market by market, region by region, and what we call then segment by segment, or sort of type of transport by transport. So I think it depends very much upon where in the world we are. Then, of course, on top of electrified vehicles, we also see a need of replacing certain materials in our vehicles. So we have had quite a big focus on, for example, fossil-free steel lately. Quite a large part of the weight in the truck is steel. So we announced last week that our electrical truck will be replaced from regular steel, so to say, to fossil-free steel. There will be, of course, a gradual introduction of that. We also, just 2 days ago, we handed over the first articulated hauler. That's a big construction equipment machine to a customer here in Stockholm. And that's actually the world's first articulated hauler in fossil-free steel.
Wow. Yeah, it's exciting. We've had SSAB on here, of course, talking about on the shows, and also this new player, which is H2 Green Steel. Yeah, building this new factory up in northern Sweden. And the factory is really cute. I don't know if you've seen it, but they want it to blend into the landscape. They want it to reflect the culture of Sweden. They're actually making it an architectural project as much as a new factory, which I think is a statement of intent. That's really good. Okay, so I'm going to come back, Karin, to you. So, electric cars, right? Everyone's sort of seeing lots of electric cars and Nissan Leafs everywhere floating from the trees, and, you know, electric car is on its way, right?
Some Volvos as well.
I know, I'm just kidding you there. But in Norway, they say every second car now is an electric car. And in Sweden, electric vehicles were the most popular choice for car buys last month. So, when do you see in this journey? And by the way, that's not to devalue the fact that this is an incredible thing that's going on right now, and there's still a long way to go, Stuart. So this question seemed a bit glib when I just look at it again. But when do you feel that we'll start seeing the same kinds of conversations around trucks? Oh my God, you know, they're the biggest seller now versus, you know, say the older trucks or whatever. When do you think the flip over might occur? Maybe not in all markets, of course, Karin, because that's really difficult, but maybe say in Sweden or Northern Europe.
Let me start with our target. So if we take Volvo Group, all type of products, both machines and trucks and buses, in 2030, our target is that 35% of all new sales is electric globally. That, of course, means that some markets needs to go before. We see electrification happening in Europe, in US, Australia right now, and other markets to come. Today, the numbers are quite small. So if you look upon trucks, I think we took something like 1,100 orders last year, and the total market for trucks in Europe is around 240,000 trucks.
Wow.
So there's still some time to go. But talking then about market share, in Europe last year we had 42% of the market share from Volvo. So we feel that we are very well positioned in this market. And I think what is so interesting to see is that the interest from consumers about sustainable transport is huge, and that puts a demand on the transport buyers. So they are then in their turn interested in buying electric trucks. So we see a huge interest. So even though the numbers are very small, we see an enormous growth rate. Then there are a couple of things that we might come back to that is sort of obstacles or things or challenges that we need to come over in order for this really to take off. But I see we have a very interesting journey ahead of us now, the coming 8 years.
I don't know if we're coming at some moment to talk about the charging infrastructure, but I just was more a comment than anything else, really. But maybe we'll come this to later. But we also had, another Swedish company with big trucks on the show the other day. And the penny dropped in my head that suddenly you realized that the charging infrastructure for the passenger vehicles is obviously going a bit faster than with the trucks, yeah? But also that even within Europe, different countries have got different ambitions on this. So if you've got a long-distance truck, and maybe even a long-distance car traveling, you may find that it's all going very well through Sweden, and there's lots of infrastructure in the next, 2-3 years. But you might end up in Portugal having a bit of a problem. Nothing against Portugal, but do you know what I mean? Some kind of standard on infrastructure charging across European states at the very minimum would seem to be something that the Commission should be addressing.
But on that point, and we can move on to it in more detail later, but you're right. I mean, even in the EU, the charging situation is far from perfect. So 70% of the EU's charging points are only in 3 countries, France, Netherlands and Germany. So a massive disparity, geographical disparity in the availability of charging infrastructure, which needs to be addressed, even on the car side.
Maybe we'll come back to that later when we think about maybe a call to action. Okay. So earlier here in the Stockholm +50 Climate Hub, we've had several discussions and keynote speeches on the role of circularity in cutting emissions. And saving resources. What role does circularity play for Volvo Cars and the Volvo Group? I think in a sense you've answered some of that, but if you want to expand a little bit, I'm very happy to hear it.
I mean, embracing circularity is really critical in our journey towards zero emission mobility. So the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is a world leading authority on the circular economy, states that while 55% of the emission reductions needed to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement can be met by a shift to renewable energy, the remaining 45% can only be met through changing the way we produce, use and ultimately dispose of products. So for Volvo Cars, that means fundamentally changing the way we've produced cars for nearly 100 years. So in order to minimize wastage, maximize material value and lifetime, we're focusing on component remanufacturing, having closed material loops, so the material that's recycled at the end of the life of the car goes back into our production cycle, and also increasing the level of recycled content in the vehicle as well. But there's also circular business models that we're focusing on, like car sharing services, to maximize the use of the product as well. But the circular economy isn't just important in terms of reducing emissions and also maximizing use of resources. It also makes business sense. So, we have a goal that by embracing these circular economic principles, by 2025, we'll not only reduce our carbon emissions by 2.5 million tons annually, but also generate cost savings of around $100 million a year as well.
Karin, is this of relevance to you?
Yeah, I think we have a very similar way of looking upon this, that we need to find ways of reducing waste, of course, and we need to make sure that we can keep both products and materials much longer in the use phase. But maybe also to add, I think from a transport industry perspective, we also have some things to do when it comes to resource efficiency. Today, approximately 40 to 50% of the total load capacity in a truck is used. Meaning that there is a huge efficiency gain to be done just by having our trucks to be much more filled, so using the load capacity in a better way. So there is things to be done by us, but there is also things to be done by the industry. So to have more efficient logistics is also something that we need to look into much more in the future.
I think also, Nick, should add that this mass electrification, I think you also mentioned in your question, will also put tremendous strain and demand on valuable minerals and metals and resources, particularly those involved in battery production. So the IEA has predicted that demand for lithium will increase by 40 times by 2040, cobalt 25 times, which is why, and I think Volvo Group as well, intend to remanufacture, reuse and recycle batteries as well, to make sure that you utilize these minerals and metals and minimize extraction as much as you can, because this is all about planetary boundaries at the end of the day.
I read in the Financial Times, I think about 2 or 3 months ago, that one of the people behind the Tesla cars, right, not the one we know, not the chap we know, but another guy who's a bit of a genius, left Tesla and now runs a battery collection center, doesn't he, in the Nevada desert or something? He's collecting every battery he can in the United States because he realizes that those materials are going to be absolutely gold dust. I just want to come back on one thing on the circularity business, because we've had many people from many companies and industries on various shows in the last 12 months. And I just was thinking that there was one company we had, and it may seem totally irrelevant to what you're doing, but it's a flooring company called Target. They're a massive multinational. And they have, their moonshot is to bring back all the flooring that they sell all around the world and make it fully recyclable. But as they pointed out, it's quite hard if you sell a piece of flooring to, say, somewhere very far on the other side of the world. How can you guarantee you can get it back? And I wondered, I mean, you mentioned, touched on that a little bit. How can you guarantee you get every Volvo car back too?
I mean, having global, what we call take-back schemes is absolutely critical, I think, so that, you know, you can actually take back the cars at the end of their first life, you know, recycle the material and the components in them, and that's something that we are working on. It's not an easy thing. The other point is, if you have car-sharing services like our car-sharing service, we actually own the cars as well. So I think the more ownership you as a company have through like car sharing service, it's easier obviously to take back the cars and do what you just said.
I can just imagine somebody doing a bank job in an electric Volvo and driving all the way to the other side of the world and then crashing it over a cliff, and poor Stuart having to go down with a big crane and haul it back to Sweden.
And maybe not everything needs to go back to Sweden either.
No, I mean, they don't have, there'd be regional sense. That's absolutely right, Karin.
Yeah, it was just my little joke.
And I think certain businesses, you are closer to the customer than in other businesses, and I think ours are typically one of those.
Yeah, good point. Good point. All right, moving on, because we've got 5.5 minutes. Okay, individuals and individual companies can only do so much. What measures do we need to see from governments in terms of laws and regulations to speed up the transition to a fossil-free mobility? Who would like to start with that?
Do you want me to go? I think there's a couple of things. First of all, you know, we need clear end dates for internal combustion engine sales. Talk about the passenger vehicle side, science-based. By 2035 in leading markets, Europe, US and China, and globally by 2040. That sends a very strong signal to the industry. They need to abandon fossil fuel technology and at pace. Secondly, consumer incentives, so in terms of tax reductions, etc., to increase the attractiveness of EVs, at least until price parity with fossil fuel engine vehicles is reached, which we estimate to be around 25, 26. Thirdly, what we touched on earlier, significant investment in widespread public charging infrastructure powered by clean energy and ideally fast charging. Then finally, public procurement of electrified vehicles sends an incredibly strong demand side and helps stimulate the market. So President Biden's recent decision to electrify the 600,000 strong federal fleet was really welcome in that regard.
Karin?
A little bit the same story. We think that incentives will play quite an important part. With the new technologies, of course, the price is a little bit higher. And before we get scale on cars, you might have a bit more scale than we have on the truck side. So we think that incentives will play a part. We also would like to advocate for the opposite. We would like to put a price on carbon. We think that carbon tax is one important thing that is needed in order to get the transition to happen. I've already mentioned building of infrastructure, but that's also very important. There are many good initiatives right now when it comes to building of infrastructure, but that's definitely something that needs to happen. And finally, it's as a global society, of course, we need to increase the renewable energy, the amount of renewable energy, green energy, and we need to find a much more efficient way of distributing that energy and to upscale the grid in different ways.
Absolutely. I mean, we really need more renewable energy. I mean, it's amazing how well it's doing, right? Doubling every 3.5 years, according to the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, and that's really fantastic. But, we need to go exponential right now, don't we? I mean, there's going to be so many demands on that grid for green energy, and absolutely, governments really need to get moving.
And if we're not successful with that, electrification will fail if we don't find enough renewable energy.
Exactly,
so it's
because
really
the customers will go away, won't they? They'll say, I'm sorry, I can't handle this.
Well, it just doesn't reach, to my point earlier, it just doesn't reach their full climate potential.
Exactly.
It's essential towards achieving that.
Yeah, you need it for transport, you need it for buildings, you need it, I mean, everywhere. It has to become the norm, right? Very, very fast, absolutely. Okay, we are really running a nice conversation here, and I wish we had another hour, quite frankly. Let's maybe make sure we got some of the crucial questions here. Okay, do you think it will be possible to bring electrification of your vehicles from cars and trucks to buses beyond the so-called developed markets? I think you've kind of answered that in a sense. Yeah. It's going to be a hybrid situation for some years, isn't it? Until you've got some dates and you've got infrastructure in these developing countries to...
Yeah, and I think because we are both global companies, we have global targets, so we will have to bring it to all countries, but it needs to start somewhere. And for us, it's a lot about having the scale, so maybe the price can come down a little bit, and then, of course, also the energy system and the infrastructure needs to come. But it's absolutely necessary. In some years, this needs to be globally. It can't only be in the so-called developed countries.
Yeah. But there also needs to be some creative thinking around this as well. So, you know, electric vehicles are also essentially battery storage things on wheels. So, you know, in developing countries in particular, they could be used to manage supply of energy to the system, and massive potential of solar and wind in these parts of the world. Biggest wind farm in the world in India.
Yeah.
Solar farm, sorry.
Exactly. Well, even in Kenya and Turkana in the north, they have the largest wind farm in sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, it's happening. It's just, again, needs to go faster. I wonder with the last few moments we've got, Karin, I've saved in my mind a quote from you that says, partnership is the new leadership. What do you mean by that?
What I mean with that is that some years ago, we could develop the world's best truck. We put it on the market, and that was it. Today, there are so many things that needs to come together in order for us to be successful and in order for the world to be successful. The challenges here are huge, and then we need to work together. And we also need to work together in new ways, really. So a complete new ecosystem is needed in order for us to be successful.
Okay, great.
Collaboration's key in the race to zero, I think, is the phrase which is key to this. You can't achieve it without collaboration.
Yeah. Good. I'm going to have to wrap it up there because we've run out of time. Our dear friends from UNDP are coming on the show in a few seconds. And but I wonder if our techies could just run that film that we promised to run at the beginning right now on 1972. Thank you very much
indeed.
In
1972, global leaders came together in Sweden for the first ever United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. It was unlike any previous event, bringing together 113 governments to discuss humanity's impact on the natural world.
It is clear that the environmental crisis which is confronting the world will profoundly alter the future destiny of our planet.